So there's two major ways to control our buoyancy and tune our buoyancy. Majority of us will use, especially in the beginning, they'll focus a lot into achieving the neutral buoyancy using their BCD, and we'll use our BCD as our main source of buoyancy, or main device for buoyancy control. Not only because when you're going down or when you're going up, and you have the biggest variations on volume, your lungs are not enough to, your lung variations are not enough to control all that. So you'll need that to use that BCD in order to help those buoyancy variations. But with that, in order to get really good with it, like everything in scuba diving, you really have to get to know your equipment. And there's a massive difference, for example, in using a standard jacket BCD into a wing style BCD, into then a donut wing and all that, because there's the different ways that the air travel within your wing or within your BCD, and where is that those air pockets on your equipment that will have a massive influence on your buoyancy. So normally the way we learn how to scuba dive, we use the BCD as our main source of buoyancy until we get to a neutral state, and then that's when we start using our lungs in terms of buoyancy. Now, in order to properly fine-tune our buoyancy with your lungs, one of the things that we need to be really aware is our breathing and the way we breathe. Because the moment we start multitasking or something comes up, that's when we start noticing, well, we don't notice, but if we put a camera in front of you and we ask you to do a skill, for example, the first thing you will notice watching that video is the changes in the bubbles, in the changes in your breathing rate. That makes a massive difference when you're using your lungs in order to fine tune your buoyancy. So in order to get that nice, comfortable pattern, you really need to get in control of your breathing, okay? From the moment you start the dive, and even from the moment you're preparing for the dive, you're already preparing yourself and organizing your breathing and imagining how your dive is going to be, if you're going to face any currents, if there's a lot of currents, where you're going to go, if things go wrong, what can I do? And if you plan all that in your head, it will makes you a lot more comfortable in the water when those situations arises. And all that, although it doesn't seem to have influence in your buoyancy, it's actually one of the things that influence your buoyancy the most. That's why normally when you see someone with a really nice trim with good buoyancy, you notice their breathing rates, they're very controlled, okay? Nice, long breathing, normal breathing rates. Now, some people like to discuss that, and they have the theory that breathing underwater, in order to save air, you need to breathe long inhalations and then really deep exhalations. But what that is doing is actually huge variations on your lungs, okay? So what's happening, therefore, is also you're having bigger variations in your buoyancy. So perhaps the best way to control your breathing in terms of your buoyancy is to just breathe as normally as you're breathing on the surface. If you don't change those breathing rates and you just fill your lungs into a normal capacity, and you're not overextending your lungs, or you're not really emptying too much of your lungs, you're just keeping that fine line, not moving too much on your buoyancy. Because that way, for example, if you really want to just come up a little bit, and instead of using your BCD to come up and go down, you can use your overextension of your lungs, or you're really exhaling harder on your lungs to use them as to go down a little bit or to come up a little bit. So you're using your lungs as a floating device as well, not only to keep that line, but also to small variations on your breathing, give you small variations on your buoyancy. So when discussing using the lungs or using the BCD for buoyancy, in my personal opinion, it's always using everything. Okay, so you use your BCD for the biggest variations in your buoyancy. So when you're coming up several meters or you're coming down several meters and you have big variations in volume, then you will use your BCD for it. But if it's smaller variations in your buoyancy, your lungs with a nice controlled breathing rate or extending a little bit your inhales and your exhales will be enough just to go up a little bit or come down a little bit. So you don't have to use all that air in your BCD. If you use a combination of these two, what you notice is your gas consumption in the end of the dive will reduce quite a lot. Not only because you're comfortable, you're not going up and down, so your body is not fighting to keep in line, but also when you're using just the BCD for control of your buoyancy, and you're using the inflator and deflator just to go 1 meter or 2 meters and going like that, you're actually wasting the air from your tanks. So your air consumption will be a lot bigger. It might seem that it's just a little bit, but in the end of a dive, how many touches you're given in that BCD and how many air you passing into your tank will actually makes a difference in the end of the day on your SPG. Now, buoyancy is probably one of the skills that requires more practice. You can be an ace on buoyancy. You stop your diving for 3 or 4 months, you jump in the water, nothing else has changed, but you struggle a little bit with everything. And normally you struggle a little bit with everything because your breathing rate normally just goes a little bit off. You're not used to it anymore. You're out of control. You're out of habit, for example. So all these things need practice. Constant diving, be in control of all your gear. Every time you change BCD, different styles of BCD, and even different styles of wings, for example, that the little bit of air that you put one time in your inflator has different rates of air that goes inside the BCD. So you'll need to try out and try and dive in order to get really in control of those things. So as you can see, lungs require a lot of practice. And when I say require a lot of practice, is getting that breathing rate into a normal breathing rate, especially when you have to do a task, such as a skill, for example. And that's what happens to a lot of the recreational divers that hasn't done courses or anything in quite a while. And then something happens because they're not used to task load. Their breathing changes, and what will happen is they normally either they shoot up to the surface or they go down to the bottom because they don't control that breathing anymore. And that happens a lot, for example, when you ask someone to shoot an SMB, and that's when everybody stops and try to play with those breathing rates, and now you have an extra floating device in your hands. Once you notice, you're already on the surface. So all this requires a lot of practice and a lot of diving, even for the BCD, because you need to be in control of your gear, get to know your gear. For example, a circular wing, the air travels nicely through all the wing. There's no such hard bands that can lock the air. So all it takes is little movements on your body, and you can put the air exactly where you want. So let's say, for example, you have the weights more located on your waist with a very light wing, very light cylinder, a nice buoyant suit, and very light fins. You'll have the weight only on one part of your body. So just changing and tilting slightly your body, locating the air exactly on the pocket of the wing where you want. That will help you establishing buoyancy and therefore your trim. So the position that you want to stay with no effort. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's perfectly horizontal. Sometimes a good trim is something with a little bit of angle, because that's the position you can keep without effort. Okay, and you can swim effortless. Not always a perfect trim will be a nice flat horizontal position. A BCD, for example, a standard jacket BCD, the air doesn't travel as nicely through the air pockets as you'll travel, for example, through a wing. So those variations and those tiltings won't work as well as you will have, for example, with a wing. Then you have the donut wings and the horseshoe wings. And the horseshoe wings, the air can't travel, for example, on the bottom of the wing. So you depend on 2 air pockets on the side. So all it takes is, for example, when you're tilting, you put it slightly angled, then you have more air on one side of the pocket than on the other. So that naturally that will give you a lot of positively buoyance like that. And naturally that will give you that notion that you're always going aside. So knowing your gear and how the air travels inside your BCD, it's quite important to achieve that nice and easy buoyancy. And the only way you can get that is by diving with your own gear. Then comes the topic that for those who use dry suits, a lot of people has that question, and a lot of people have really strong opinions on how to control the buoyancy using the BCD, no matter if it's a standard jacket BCD or a wing or the dry suit. There's benefits and there's cons on both things. I personally use a combination of both, but I focus a lot is having the air in my dry suit, for example. Now, using the air solely on the BCD, what will happen is as you go down, you always need to put some air inside your BCD to avoid the squeeze. So we will not count with that air to squeeze at this stage for the purpose of buoyancy. We're talking just air for buoyancy, not to avoid the squeeze. For example, if you only put the air inside your BCD, the air on the BCD is limited to a very, very small pocket. So all those variations, they travel quite on a very short area. So your point of gravity is located really on only one point. So especially if you're wearing really heavy fins, normally that's what we use with the dry suit, now you have weight really far away from where your air is. So you have negatively weight here and your only positive weight is here. So you really need to work your body to put on a nice position. So that will make it slightly harder to keep that buoyancy, for example. And then you'll use your lungs as well. But bigger variations of that, the BCD is actually the best thing to do. Because if you put a lot of air in your suit, the moment you start coming up, you can't dump it as easily as you can dump it on your BCD as well. Also, the suit won't have the same capacity in terms of lifting buoyancy as, for example, a wing. For those who are wearing twin systems with stages and scooters, and the more adds-on you have and the deeper you are, that suit only won't have the ability to compensate all that weight and all that negatively buoyancy. When you're coming up using the BCD, it's a lot easier to dump. You'll know all the valves, and it will dump a lot quicker. Whilst, for example, on the dry suits, there's only one, generally speaking, there's only one point of dumping the air, which is on your shoulder. So if you need to dump a lot of air, and by any chance you don't have your shoulder as your upper area, or which means the area that is located more to the surface, then you have absolutely no way to dump all that air from the suit. And right now you're in a very, very rapid ascent that will definitely put you in danger for a big accident. Now, with all that in mind, there's always benefits to use your dry suit as also a secondary source of buoyancy, not only to avoid the squeeze. And in my opinion, and the way I like to teach it, is like a bubble. So if you grab, for example, your bowl of water with a little bit of water air in there, so you have a small bubble, and you put yourself in this position, the smaller the bubble, and if you play with your bottle, what happens is that the variations are quite drastic. Now, the bigger the bubble and being spread evenly through your suit, it will make your position on, for example, a horizontal position a lot easier. And once you get the air exactly where you want in your dry suit, then you, without moving, you'll just maintain that buoyancy. Super easy. That comes handy, for example, when you're having really heavy fins, and you put just a tiny amount of air inside your boots to compensate those fins. If you're wearing stages, you'll need to put a little bit more air on the dry suit on the area of the torso to compensate the weight of those regulators. So once you put all that nicely positioned, and you can even put your arms to the front and the air will travel inside. So now you're dispersing the air through your body. So it's nice and even position. So all those variations, if you just notice slightly less. So you can keep a nice horizontal position with a lot less effort, because the positive forces or the buoyant forces are a lot more spread throughout all your body and not only on the area of the BCD. So whilst if you imagine the body like that, and you only have the BCD in here, the only buoyant forces are there in the middle. So all this here is negative forces. So you're going to work like that. Now, if you have buoyant forces, small buoyant forces spread through all the body, well, this compensate everything. So the small tilts will help compensating and bring you back to a normal position. In fact, you'll actually struggle a little bit more to put all that air in there on only one point. So you really need to push yourself to put all that air in there. Okay. With that in mind, dry suits can be really dangerous, especially if you don't know how to use them, and most important, if you don't know how to get that air out of your boots, for example, and how the air travel inside your suit. The dump valves on your shoulder, they generally have different positions. So if you don't know how much tilted your body needs to be in order to the air escape through your suit, that will all affect your buoyancy. So for example, I dive with my dump valve always open because I use my suit as a secondary buoyancy device. So I do put a fair bit of air inside my suit. And the reason why I always dive with my dump valve open is the moment I start coming up, the excess of air will freely go out through the suit. The problem with that is if I just want to keep a nice position at a certain depth and everything is set up for that area, for that depth, all it takes is a movement like that, exposing the valve, and the air will just flow. Then I need to overcompensate for that loss of air. So I need to go back to the suit and inject a little bit more air. You can compensate that, or you can fix that by closing the valve or semi-closing the valve. But then if you come up on a rapid ascent, you'll need your second hand to go there to the valve and actually dump it to release the air. Normally on emergency situations, our hands are always onto something. So you'll have to get rid of those things to go in there for your dump valve. So you always need to choose what is more comfortable for you. And in my opinion, there is not only one right way of doing things. There's always different ways to adapt to the situations. And a lot of people like to use just the BCD for their buoyancy and use the air inside their dry suits just to avoid the squeeze. Other people are like me, they use both. Other people, they will use their dry suit as their main buoyancy control device, and they only add air on the BCD when the air inside the suit is not enough to actually compensate for the variations in pressure and volume, and you'll need to add that extra air to your suit. Now, I've been saying that you need a lot of practice to get to your lung breathing and compensating for buoyancy. Same for BCD, and it's a lot more important when you have a dry suit, because you really need to know your dry suit. You really need to know how those variations will influence and how the air will travel inside the suit, and when you want to lock the air in certain areas, for example, then there will be differences between a tri-lamp suit into, for example, a neoprene suit. A tri-lamp suit will have a lot more capacity for air inside the suit than a neoprene suit will have, without extending the neoprene. So all those different suits will have different impacts. Then when you have a tri-lamp, you have all those undergarments inside, and depending on the undergarments that you'll have, those undergarments will retain more air or less air. So you always need to be aware of that once you're using that for your buoyancy as well, because the undergarments themselves will trap air. So if you don't move the air, if you don't compensate for that, then you'll have a problem on your ascent, for example, that you need to get rid of the air of your suit if you didn't get the air of your BCD. So like everything, and no matter what you choose to control your buoyancy, it's all about training and practicing and doing a lot of diving. That necessarily doesn't mean that you need to go out on the boat and doing hardcore diving. Actually, majority of the dives that I do for myself, practice with buoyancy, are in really, really shallow waters, about 1-2 meters of water. That's where I practice a lot of my skills in buoyancy and the variations of buoyancy, and really tweak my gear to get the perfect spots and the perfect weighting and distribution of weights. I always do that in shallow waters, because that's where the biggest variations of pressure will happen, is on those first 10 meters of water. That's when the volume comes to half, and that's where you should do your majority of your skills. Also, one of the things that helps a lot understanding your buoyancy and your body position and everything is actually go out there, take a camera, practice some skills in front of the camera, and then come back home, review those skills, and you'll actually see how everything is affecting. So for example, if you have a brand new dry suit, you don't have many dives on it, and you don't understand where the air is travel on it, take a camera, put a tripod, or ask someone to hold the camera for you, and you just rotate, understand, tilt your body, practice different positions until you find your sweet spot on the dry suit, on your wing, on anything exactly. That's generally how I do things, and I find these exercising dives are really helpful to compensate my problems. For example, when I did my deco course recently, I did it in side mount, but I've never dived in side mount with a stage. And the stage setup that I was using was extremely heavy. Now, side mount is everything about balance. So I had 0 weight on my backs. So the weight is always on the side, exception for one little piece of weight that I had in my back. Now, when I put a stage in only one side, I'm putting a lot of weight on the other side. So I really need to compensate for that. It took me about 3 or 4 dives to actually get back to a nice even position with no effort. On the first 2 dives, I was just swimming in circles because I couldn't stop swimming to compensate for that heavy weight in there. So it started by adjusting the thickness of the bungee of the stage, and then putting a little bit of weight on the other side of the wing to get the same weight distribution between the stage and the rest of the body. So as you can see, it's twerking little things like even the thickness of a bungee of a stage that will help you in long term to get that. Now, you won't get those twerks if you don't go out there and you actually pay attention to those details. If you just go for a dive to look for fish, and that's your main thing, you basically spend majority of your dive compensating for your problem, which is your buoyancy. So you actually never fix your problem. In order, if the buoyancy is a problem for you, you actually need to dedicate some time fixing that problem. And a lot of fixing the problems is spending time understanding what's happening. One of the hardest things to do when you're diving, when you're scuba diving, is not doing anything. Stay motionless, because that's when all the problems will just light up like a Christmas tree, and you have problem here, problem there, problem there. And when you notice, you're already on a position like that. If that happens, let it happen. Just let your body move the way they want to move it. It wants to move. Because then you go like, right, why this happened? Okay, is it the weight? Maybe I need to shift the weights a little bit more, 5 centimeters to the right, or my 5 centimeters to the left, or maybe perhaps change one weight from a pocket that is not, it's not balanced in there, and put it on my tank strap, for example, and that will make all the difference if you're unbalanced with weights. If the problem is the stage, where is the weight on the stage? If it's a cylinder, if it's a steel cylinder, probably the weight is very, very even. But if it's a aluminium stage, the weight is more focused on where the rags are and where the valve is. So the weight of the stage is more on the front. So you have positive buoyancy in the back of the stage, but negatively buoyant on the front of the stage, on the head of the stage. So you'll need to change maybe a little bit of your position or your tilting of your body in order to compensate for that variation. But all this takes time. You need to go out there and you need to actually listen to your body, listen to what's happening. And when I say listen, it's also reading what's happening. That's why majority of the times having a camera and seeing in video what's happening help you analyzing that and changing and tweaking those little details. And in the end, well, this might seem a lot of work, but in the end, it will make your dive so much easier. You'll save a lot of air. Your air consumptions will go straight down. You'll have a lot more fun. And when a problem comes up, that problem will seem a lot smaller because buoyancy is not an issue anymore. And you can actually fix what happened just without worrying if you're shooting up to the surface or you're sinking down to the bottom. This is basically all the things I wanted to discuss one way. I think right now it would be a lot more benefit for all of us if we unmute everybody and we'll just have a nice discussion of different ways and different approaches, because like I'm going to repeat myself, but there's not only one right way to do stuff. We're all different. We all have different equipment, and the best way to find a good way for you is actually to discuss things with other divers as well. So guys, just unmute yourselves if you want to turn on your cameras as well, so we can all see each other's, and we can just have a chat and come up with different ideas and what works for you. If you have a problem, ask questions about your specific problem, and we can work out different solutions. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Fábio.
Hello. All right. Hello, Troy.
Hey, mate. How are you?
Good. Right, guys. Yeah, don't be shy. Throw it up there. Silence.
Okay, Troy, you go.
Well, it's thrown me to the lions.
That's right. Okay, I've got a question. So
Sure.
when, do you remember with my dry suit, I kind of came up really quickly at about 6 meters. When do I dump? I know I should dump all the air. When is the best time when you're coming up to dump all the air out of your dry suit?
So that's the difference between just using the air just to compensate for the squeeze, or using as a secondary device. If you're using as a secondary device, what you'll find is you need to continually dump air as you'll come up to on your ascent. Because if you wait till a certain depth to just dump the air, that means that you were always positively buoyant until you stop and dump the air. In any descent or any ascent, you always want to be in control of the ascent of the ascent, which means that you always need to be able to stop your ascent and descent with no effort at all. So probably, in my opinion, the best way to do is, as you're coming up, you'll just start slowly letting go of the air of your suit. So you're not only letting the air of your suit going, you're also letting air of the BCD going. So it's all about the excess air that needs to free flow as you start coming up. And a lot of that is at the position of your body. So when you want to come up and you want to let that excess of air go up, probably you really need to make sure that your dump valve is actually the highest point of your suit, for example.
Yeah, that was going to be something I was going to ask too. So I've got a couple of different dry suits, and both are, both dumps work very differently. So when it comes to to purchasing a dry suit, what should you be looking at in the way of dumps? Like, do you find there's a specific dry suit for a specific way of diving?
There are actually specific dump valves for specific type of diving. So you have the high profile valves. Normally they are a little bit smaller but higher. So something like the standard valves that comes with for example, the Senti suits. And then you have the Apex, for example, the Apex low profile valves. So they're quite large like that, but they're quite small. So for example, normally cave divers, they always option for the low profile valves because they don't want their valves to get stuck into something, but also the variations in depth for them, they're quite small. They're not always going up and down because they don't have where to go. They actually have a ceiling in there. So that the valve will depend a lot in what kind of diving you'll be doing. Regarding the position of the valve, unfortunately, you can't choose exactly where you want that position. So you always need to adapt your body position to the position of the valve. The examples I can think of, for example, are the Senti suits with the Scuba Pro suits. So the Senti suit, the valve is located a little bit more external than the Scuba Pro suit. So putting your arm just nicely extended on the Senti, if you have the valve open, the air will just flows nicely away from the suit. Whilst, for example, on the Scuba Pro, because it's located like 5 degrees more inwards, You actually need to move your body to let go of the air, even if that valve is open. So
I have a bear suit, which I don't use anymore because that was the case, but also my dive right, you know, has, but I've also got another one where it's got smaller valves on the actual wrists, which I find very painful with computers and so forth. So
what was Apollo had the suits with the valves on, dump valves on the boots as well. I find the more valves you have, it's more things that you need to remember to open or close or have it in your mind. Having one valve only, in my opinion, is a lot better because it's only one valve. All you need to know is how much air did I put inside my suit. If I'm doing a rapid ascent, is that valve open or closed? If are my hands able to reach there, and what is my body position or what is my shoulder position necessary to let go of the air? Because a lot of suits, all it takes is a little bit of a twerk in your elbow, and that the air will come off, and then you put your elbow back up, and that stops. So, for example, on the Santi suit, all it takes is a shoulder movement like that. On the Scuba Pro suit, I'll need to twerk the shoulder in order to push that dump valve up. So it's all about the small variations in your body position. But you only get that sweet point if you go out and you dive, and you try different things. Because the suits are different, variations are different.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, anybody? Any other question? Oh, it's so quiet today.
So what's your thoughts on ankle weights, Fábio?
Ankle weights, that's a very good question.
Thank you.
It's a very, very good question. Majority of us use heavy fins, and normally that compensates for the ankle weights. Ankle weights are super handy if you don't have enough heavy fins, or the socks that you're using and the undergarments that you're using are trapping a lot of air in your boots. That said, it also has to do with the size of the boots you're wearing, because if you have a boot that is too big for your feet size, well, that boot is actually being filled up with more air than a boot that will fit better on your feet. So having those ankle weights there will actually help you compensate for that air that is just trapped in the boots that won't come out. The more you fill up the boot, the more easy it is to actually control the amount of air inside the boots of your dry suit. But if that boot is not being filled up, the air is actually going to be trapped in there. So having some ankle weights might actually make your life a lot easier. Now that depends as well is how heavy will be those ankle weights. They're generally not that heavy, but there are different weights out there.
Thank you.
I've got a question, Fábio.
Sure, Clay.
What's your opinion on redundant bladders with, say, your side mount harnesses? Would you say they're only for cave diving, or would you extend their use to open water diving, or would you see them as not useful at all?
All right. So, for example, side mount bladders. My side mount rig has an incorporated bladder, but just on the bottom of it. So that's why I was saying that I use my suit as a secondary device when I'm using a back wing, but when I'm using a side mount rig, my dry suit becomes my main source of buoyancy. In fact, but it gets to the point, for example, when I'm doing a deep dive and I go past 25-30 meters, the air in the suit is not enough to compensate for the weights of the two steel cylinders that I carry. So that's when I go back to my side mount bladder and I start filling it. So I know that the first air that I will need to get rid on my ascent will be from the BCD bladder, the side mount bladder, because it doesn't have that much lifting capacity. And then I'll start dumping from the suit as well. So it really depends on how deep you're going, the kind of steel cylinders you're carrying as well makes a massive difference. But it's always good to have it and to use it. Definitely, you never want to rely on only one source of buoyancy, especially when you're carrying 2 cylinders, or you're going a little bit over the normal weight as well, for example. So it becomes really useful, and it's definitely something that you use. Absolutely. Right, anybody? Malcolm, you're very quiet.
Yeah. I guess the most difficulty I ever have is, changing kits from open circuit to closed circuit diving, and also just travelling. At home, I'm always diving heavy fins, and then I travel and end up in the tropics, need other than to trim me out because I'm using light fins, and yeah.
That's a massive difference. Yeah, that impacts a lot on your buoyancy. Just the change of the fins. Because that's what I was explaining. Having the body with the buoyant forces spread it evenly, and now you don't have, and you have more buoyant forces in one side of your body than the other.
Yeah, when I'm traveling, I always find that first dive very interesting.
Definitely. I don't have any experience with closed circuits, but you can help me with that.
It's just an extra bubble to worry about.
Exactly, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's all I think. In terms of buoyancy, I think that's all there is. That it's another bubble that you have to be aware of and manage. Yeah.
Right. Destroy. You also dive with a closed circuit, don't you?
Yes.
What's the main differences you find in terms of buoyancy?
Everything is done through your BC. So when so I guess it's a closed circuit. So the amount of gas is the amount of gas that's in that loop in your lungs all the time. So you don't get that, like you breathe out, you descend a little bit, you take a bit of a breath, you start to ascend. So you can't, there's none of that. So it's whatever your buoyancy is, it sort of stays there as you're breathing. So that's probably the biggest difference. So, and it takes a little bit of getting used to, you go to take a bit of a breath to ascend a little bit, to go over something, or, breathe out to go under, and you don't move, you just stay there. So, but like it's, so that's the major difference. Everything is through through the BC or through your dry suit. But it's, it's been, most of your effort goes into being absolutely correctly weighted for what you've got. So then you're not also using gas that you don't need to use, since you've only got a smaller cylinder. You got your bailout as well, but you don't want to be using that for buoyancy. So, but you really practice your buoyancy and making sure that you understand, or when you change something, you're checking to make sure that you've got it right.
So that's actually quite funny that we have different techniques and different units in here, because myself, Clay, Janine, we don't dive closed circuits, so fine tuning with breathing is something that we will do. But for example, for those who are diving with closed circuits, fine tuning with breathing is something that doesn't make much sense, is it?
Yeah, it's not an option.
It's not an option at all.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite funny when we start teaching scuba diving. We tell our divers to to learn and to always use the lungs and breathing to fine tuning, and then they go, and you guys go so technical, and you go like, yeah, no, don't worry about it. That doesn't make any sense when you're putting a loop in front of you and you breathe in, and there's absolutely no difference in changes. Janine, is it clear what we're talking about in fine tuning, the absence of fine tuning in breathing on a closed circuit for you?
I don't know what the closed circuit is, sorry.
So yeah, it's a rebreather. So
oh, okay, yep, I get it. Yeah.
So the air that you exhale is actually not going out, not going away. It's being recycled. So breathing in and breathing out actually makes no variation in your buoyancy. And that's why I asked that question to the rebreather boys about the fine tuning with the lungs not making much sense.
So is it a whole different style of buoyancy, or still the basic? Yeah.
Well, you lose the option of control of the fine tuning with your breathing effort, because it makes no difference, because the air's either in your lungs or it's in the circuit, and the volume is just the same. Whether you've at peak inspiration or peak expiration, there's no difference in the volume on the circuit diver.
So as you can see, you can even perfect your buoyancy and your buoyancy techniques in one circuit or one style of diving. Then you change to another thing, and then you need to relearn everything you've done so far. That's the beauty about scuba diving, isn't it? And changing from one unit to another.
Yeah. What would you recommend are the best practice beaches at the moment?
Sorry?
What would you recommend are the best practice beaches at the moment?
Honestly, anywhere where you can get in the water, but what you need to be aware of, a majority of the places now have a 1 hour rule for parking.
Yeah.
So if you overstay that 1 hour, you actually get fined. I will always recommend you guys, for the moment, if you want to go and practice diving, is gear up at your car and just walk down to the water. So avoid using any tables or anything like that, because that can come up with problems in terms of policing and everything. The idea is keep moving. So you'll gear up, you get in the water, you do your dive, come back out, just take off your gear into the car and drive away. It is now official that we can scuba dive, but if we just start breaking the other rules, it's one thing that they will take away from us. So it all depends on us to keep that good thing with us, that we can still go out for the dive. Places like I believe like Clifton Gardens is still open. Shell is still open as well. Taylor's Point is always open, so you can always check with the councils where you can go for a dive, if that place is open or not. And if it's too busy, just come back another time or a different day, because that's one of the things that unfortunately people haven't respected yet, is that if it's busy, they're still going. You can always come back another day, I believe.
Yeah.
Any other question or idea? All right. So I think this will be probably a wrap up. Guys, thank you so much for coming. And
thank you.
And thank you for making the effort.
For participating.
And happy Easter.
Happy Easter for everybody. Yeah.
Everyone. Yes.
Alrighty. These webinars will keep on going. We'll have different topics for different people coming in and having a chat. So just keep pay attention to our Facebook page and everything, and we'll hope to see you guys in our future webinars.